The three pyramids rise in the fading afternoon light, like three unmoving silhouettes in a sea of sand, and when a soft breeze sweeps across their stone, worn down by thousands of years, you cannot help but feel that this place once knew more than it now remembers. The stacked blocks do not carry only the mark of human labor. They also stir a question that is not easy to answer. How could one of the earliest civilizations of humankind create something that seemed to exceed the limits of their own age? That question stands quietly beside the massive stones, persistent as the desert's silence itself. As the sun descends, the edges of the stone sharpen like blades of light, reflecting a beauty that feels both delicate and strangely unfamiliar. In that moment, the pyramids are no longer just structures. They feel like models placed precisely where they needed to be, meant to suggest something long forgotten. No one truly knows what drove the ancient builders to achieve such nearly impossible precision. We only know that their silence leaves us sensing that something remains unexplained. For centuries, pilgrims who journeyed toward Giza often felt they were approaching a secret. They described each step across the sand as though entering a place where time had paused. Even if they could not express it clearly, they shared the same intuition. The three pyramids were not built merely to stand there. They had a purpose. And that purpose was far more than simply holding the bodies of the pharaohs. There were also nights when the sky opened wide, filled with stars, and the three monuments lay still beneath it, as if waiting for something from above. From a distance, one could sense a faint correspondence between their placement on the ground and the stars shining overhead. Not every alignment is accidental, and not every alignment can be explained by the naked eye alone. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heavens opened at certain moments to receive the soul. Yet sometimes, we cannot help but wonder if the earth itself once opened to receive something that came from far beyond it. Their stories of those who came from the light, passed down through generations, may have been embellished. But the root of those stories, the feeling of a meeting across worlds, still seems to echo within the layers of stone. Night wind glides across the enormous steps, creating a faint sound, almost like a whisper. And in that fragile moment between the last light and the first darkness, it becomes easy to imagine that this was once a meeting point of two realms, one belonging to humans, learning to understand the sky, and one belonging to visitors who may have come from a place humanity could never have imagined at the time. When night fully settles over Giza, the silence of the pyramids deepens, as if wrapping around the whole landscape. And in that stillness, what has long been only a question begins to feel like a possibility. That these structures may not be merely the works of human hands, but the final, physical memory of an ancient encounter, one whose traces still rest among the stones, waiting to be recognized once more. But to understand how those three pyramids could exist as structures that seem to rise beyond the limits of their age, we have to walk backward into the future, into a time when history was still as blurred as sand drifting across stone. Before Egypt became the legendary name of dynasties, there were long centuries devoted only to survival, an era when people kept no records, carved no royal names, and left behind nothing more than faint footprints beside rivers that changed their course. It was the age before the first dynasty, when everything was still taking shape, and the land had not yet belonged to any empire. The Nile Valley in those early days was nothing like the calm image preserved in history books. unpredictable floods, seasons of low water that came at the wrong time, and famines that forced people to abandon familiar ground. Some moving south, others drifting north in search of safer land. When climate shifts arrived not over centuries but within a few decades, small groups of people were forced to rely on one another, carrying with them ancestral memory and simple survival knowledge. They carried no books. They built no fortified walls. But they held something else, a form of memory that did not live on paper, but in the way they watched the sun, tracked the water line, and read the positions of the stars. And then, one day, no one knows exactly when, they began shaping the first forms, models made of earth, wood, bits of stone, as if something within them needed to impose order on the surrounding chaos. Those early models slowly became geometry, and that geometry slowly became ritual. No one truly knows why this shift happened so quickly. In a span surprisingly short, Egypt leapt from scattered riverbank communities into an astonishing level of organization. Knowledge of straight lines, of measurement, of weight. All things that should have taken hundreds of years to refine seemed to appear almost simultaneously with the rise of the first national identity. Perhaps it was simply a sophisticated evolution that later generations have not yet fully understood. Or perhaps, in the midst of this upheaval, humanity received something, not a physical object, but a new way of seeing the world. A way of seeing that made them think beyond shelters for rain and begin imagining structures that could live with the sky. A way of seeing that shifted their prayers from hoping for good weather to charting the heavens, as if relearning the map of a world they themselves had never belonged to. Out of the chaos of survival, they began aligning stones with the sunrise, digging channels that followed the path of moonlight, and placing wooden markers, not at random, but according to the turning of the stars. These were the first signs of a society learning to look upward. But the astonishing part is not that they looked, but that they seemed to know exactly what they were looking at. In a land still struggling to write its own name with symbols, there appeared straight lines measured to near perfection, and stones placed with almost no deviation. Was this the result of instincts refined through generations? Or was there a moment, like a small crack in the fabric of time, through which humanity glimpsed a model? Not a vision from the future, but something from beyond the turning of this world. By the time the 3 pyramids began to take shape centuries later, they did not rise from mere inspiration or the pride of pharaohs. They seemed built upon knowledge already present, as if someone long before had laid out a pattern, waiting only for the right, quiet moment to emerge. And all of it began in that era of chaos, an era that looked like nothing, yet may have been the moment when humanity quietly received something that made them more than beings struggling to survive, but the first builders of a connection far greater than themselves. Amid those turbulent years, whispered stories began to appear, soft as the breath of night wind sliding across the surface of the Nile. People at that time had not yet formed the idea of gods as later generations understood them, but they already held images of strange beings stepping down from the light. No one knows the true origin of these stories. They only know they were told with a reverence too sincere to be fabricated. When a community struggling simply to survive collectively shares the same figure, it forces us to ask what the story must have begun with. In the surviving ancient carvings, many figures are shown not rising from the earth, but descending from the sky, wrapped in a glow like a cloak. They were called by names familiar today: Ra, Isis, Osiris, Horus. Yet in the earliest days, they were not seen as symbols of nature's domains. They were viewed as visitors, beings who appeared not in dreams, but in unusual moments when light fell so intensely that people could not tell whether it came from nature or from some other kind of presence. There are curious depictions of the boat of the sun. Not the simple wooden boats used by the Egyptians, but an object that could move through the air, drifting as if it carried no weight. The ancients called it the vessel of the gods. And today, some wonder whether it might be a memory, simplified through time, of a device they had no words to describe. As these stories spread, people began to believe that knowledge did not come only from watching the sun or tracking the movement of water. Knowledge, in their view, might have been a gift, offered by beings who once stepped onto this land and left instructions on how the world should be arranged. What is striking is that these myths were not told with exaggeration. They were spoken as simple accounts, as if the storytellers were merely repeating something they or their ancestors had witnessed. Many modern scholars dismiss these stories as metaphors, but when one reads more carefully, something unusual emerges. The sky beings in Egyptian lore do not behave like gods in other cultures. They do not demand sacrifices. They do not command armies. They do not assert violent authority. They arrive, teach, and depart. Their actions resemble a temporary intervention more than divine rule. And it is precisely this temporary nature that makes the legends feel less like imagination and more like memory. In some ancient texts, there are descriptions of Osiris coming from a place not of earth, not of water, not of wind, a puzzling phrase but full of implication. The Egyptians of that era had no concept of worlds beyond their own, so they were forced to interpret through elements they understood. Just as a child seeing distant city lights for the first time might describe them as a star that came down low, the Egyptians described what they saw using the language available to them. And it is at that intersection between rustic honesty and the extraordinary that a question forms. What if these tales of gods are not merely mythology, but memories transformed into symbols over thousands of years? Memories of beings who once stood on this land, on calm nights along the Nile, offering knowledge that did not belong to a familiar world. Those whispers from antiquity still seem to echo, blending with the desert's silence, as if waiting for someone patient enough to piece them together again. And when we look at the three pyramids rising above the golden sand, it feels as though they are the last surviving fragment of a story far older than the history written in books, a story that began not from the earth, but from the sky. Sometimes we have to step far back to see the whole picture, not only back in time, but out into space. Because when our perspective rises above the ground, things that once seemed unrelated begin to appear strangely connected. Like the moment people first looked at the three pyramids of Giza from above, through the eyes of satellites and digital mapping, and realized they were not built simply to stand near each other, but arranged in an invisible order, pointing towards something beyond the limits of Earth. Those three massive structures, Khufu, Khafre, Menkaure, lie along a diagonal that leans southwest, yet nothing about that alignment is random. When overlaid on the night sky, the arrangement matches almost uncannily, the 3 brightest stars in the belt of the constellation Orion. Not a loose resemblance, but an alignment so precise that even its tiny deviations can be explained by geographical drift and the Earth's slow movements across thousands of years. The ancients could never have seen Orion the way a satellite sees it. And yet, they left behind 3 monuments that replicate that star pattern with astonishing exactness, carved into the surface of the planet. The question becomes heavier, not because of the alignment itself, but because it repeats. The same star pattern, 3 points, one offset from the other 2, appears in civilizations far apart: Teotihuacan in Mexico, Nabta Playa in the Sahara, and several incomplete sites in ancient China. It is as though multiple cultures were guided toward the same design, not by imitation, but by following some shared, silent instruction, passed in a way we cannot yet understand. Stones weighing tons do not move themselves. But what shocks researchers is not the transportation, it is the placement. Every block set with extreme precision. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned nearly perfectly to the 4 cardinal directions: east, west, south, north. Its error, less than 1/10 of a degree. No telescopes, no GPS, no modern trigonometry. Only the sun, the stars, and intuition sharpened across generations. But even that does not fully explain it, because if all of this were simply the product of observation and labor, why such precision? Why must each edge measure down to exact fractions? Why do internal passages point toward a position in the sky that appears only a few nights each year? This colossal structure was not a home, and it was not a simple observatory. The calculations are far beyond the practical needs of any early society. And if we look at it instead as a kind of device, something built with a defined purpose, rather than as a purely religious symbol, then everything begins to suggest a different line of thought. As if someone instructed them to build according to exact ratios, exact positions, exact directions. Not to honor a king, but to match a larger blueprint, a map that did not lie beneath the ground, but above it, in the stars. The Giza Plateau, from the ground, is only desert and stone, but from above it resembles a code, a geometric command written with intention, preserved across millennia, placed at a location where, if Earth were a machine, Giza would be the contact point between the system and the sky. Perhaps the ancients never fully understood what they were building, but they followed the pattern. As keepers of a map they were never allowed to see in full. They measured by the stars. They calculated by light. They arranged each stone according to something larger than themselves. And in that complete obedience to the design, we begin to feel that the 3 pyramids were not built only to exist, but to wait for something. A moment when the entire arrangement would reveal its full meaning, a signal, a connection point. In the thick heat of sand and sunlight, the 3 pyramids still stand, not only as symbols of ancient genius, but as engineering challenges that later ages have never truly surpassed. The stones that form them are not just large. They are cut so flat that when you press your hand against their surface, you cannot feel the edge. Each block weighs between 2 and 15 tons, and no 2 blocks are exactly the same. Yet when placed together, they fit so tightly that even a sheet of paper cannot slide between the joints. To raise such a structure, the ancients needed more than labor. They needed a detailed understanding of spatial geometry, force distribution, material weight, and stone finishing at a microscopic level. The question is not simply how they did it. The question is how they repeated these feats thousands of times across a structure hundreds of meters wide with an error margin of only a few centimeters. That is not the achievement of a few skilled workers. It is a system, a technology, a level of organization far beyond the simplicity history often assigns to early societies. The granite blocks used in the central chambers of the Great Pyramid were transported from Aswan, nearly 900 kilometers from Giza. Each one weighs tens of tons. Lifting a single block that heavy to such heights would already be astonishing. But the ancient Egyptians did more. They placed each piece precisely at the stress points that carried the weight of the entire structure. And they did not do this once. They repeated it consistently, accurately, systematically, as though following a blueprint where every deviation had been eliminated. There is no evidence of modern machinery. Yet on some stones, researchers have found cut marks that do not curve, chip, or wander. Marks that look as though the surface had been passed by a blade that was not controlled by hand and not made merely of copper. Some granite blocks are almost as hard as steel, yet their cut surfaces are smooth and precise enough to outshine many modern workshops. If they had no machines, then what did they use? Some scholars suggest water, sand, copper wires, and time. But time cannot produce near zero deviation across thousands of stones, and copper, only a fraction as hard as granite, cannot maintain that level of precision over hundreds of meters. Perhaps the answer is not in the tools. Perhaps it lies in their understanding of the material, a knowledge of weight distribution, sound, vibration, pressure, and fracture points that modern civilization has explored seriously for only a few centuries. Under the long shadow of the Great Pyramid, it is easy to forget that what stands before us is not simply stone, but numbers. The ratio of the base perimeter to the height mirrors the ratio of half the Earth's circumference to its radius. The area of the triangular faces equals the area of the base. The angle of the sides matches the angle of sunlight at a specific moment in the year. These numbers do not occur by accident. They were chosen. And that choice suggests something far greater than building skill. It reflects a mind that had reached the rhythms of the cosmos, or had been shown how to understand them. As we step closer to the blocks, the feeling shifts from admiration to something more like recognition, as though the structure is not merely standing, but breathing, as if each stone holds a pulse set long ago when it was placed. There is no simple explanation for why the ancients needed such precision. But if the three pyramids were a device, a transmitter, or a coded message sent across time, then even a small error might throw the entire purpose off balance. And that is why the three pyramids have endured for more than 4 millennia. Not just because stone is durable, but because from the very beginning, they were built as though they were meant to last forever. As though the thing they were created to wait for has not yet come. And until it does, each stone remains exactly where it was meant to be, locked in place like characters in a sentence no one has fully read. If the exterior of the pyramid overwhelms us with its grandeur, then its interior opens a different kind of question, quieter, but far more haunting. Beyond the meters-thick walls of stone, there is no twisting maze, no sequence of ceremonial corridors, like in other ancient temples. There's only a single axis, long, tall, dark, and utterly silent. People call it the Grand Gallery, but that name fails to capture the feeling of standing inside it, as though you have stepped into the core of a machine that stopped working ages ago. The width of the passage is only enough for a person to walk upright, yet its height is strangely excessive, far beyond any practical need for movement. The sloping walls on either side rise sharply, built from massive blocks that are not held together by mortar, but by their own weight and angle, as if all the internal forces are being guided toward a single invisible line. The space feels less like a hallway and more like a conduit, one not meant for people, but for something else. Light has no place there. No evidence has ever shown that the ancients used torches or oil lamps inside. No burn marks, no soot, no residue from traditional lighting of any kind. So if they worked in total darkness, how did they see? Or perhaps the gallery never required light at all, because it was not designed for human use in the ordinary sense. Some modern researchers have begun interpreting the Grand Gallery as a resonant chamber. With its elongated shape, smooth planes, and specific materials, it could channel sound, amplify frequencies, even enhance a particular vibration if activated correctly. From this perspective, the gallery is no corridor. It is an energy conduit, a place where movement, resonance, or even a signal could travel in a controlled direction. A throat within the structure, a hidden antenna carved in stone. There are also theories suggesting that this axis points toward a precise location in the sky at a specific moment in time. In that instant, the light of a particular star, perhaps Sirius, perhaps Orion, would shoot directly into the heart of the system, not to illuminate, but to activate a synchronization, a moment of contact. At the end of the gallery lies the entrance to the king's chamber, the legendary room positioned at the gravitational center of the entire pyramid. Yet the need to pass through a long, narrow, asymmetrical passage to reach it raises a troubling question. Why design such complexity merely to hold a body that was never found? A chamber with no mummy, no funerary traces, no offerings, only stone, symmetry, and a silence that feels untouched. Viewed through a technical lens, the structure resembles a guidance model, an energy axis blending physics, acoustics, and astronomy, as if someone designed the pyramid not as a monument, but as a device, with the gallery as its transmission channel, the chamber as its resonance core, and the entire structure as a system once activated by something that is no longer here. And perhaps that is what unsettles us most, because if what remains is only the shell, then the most important part of the pyramid was never the stone. It was the thing that once moved through it, the force that once made it vibrate, transmit, and operate in a way that even with all our modern instruments, we cannot bring back to life. And until that moment returns, the gallery will lie still inside the stone, like a severed circuit waiting for its signal to come home. Behind the main stone axis lie openings so narrow that a person could hardly squeeze through, yet they were carved, shaped, and aligned with such care that it feels as though someone once measured this space in a way human eyes were never meant to. These are the slender channels, quiet as hidden veins. The ancient Egyptians called them air shafts, though not a single breath of wind has ever passed through them. Air does not need pathways that lead from the king's chamber toward the stars. So why do they exist? And more importantly, why are they aligned with such impossible precision? Two of these perfectly straight shafts cut through meters of solid stone, extending from the king's chamber toward Orion and Sirius. Two celestial points the ancient Egyptians gazed upon with a reverence deeper than words. But strangely, the shafts do not open to the outside like windows. They are sealed, enclosed entirely within the structure, as though built to transmit something that needed no light, no airflow. Some researchers call them stone antennas, not to receive radio waves like modern technology, but to direct a form of resonance flowing outward or inward. From a traditional perspective, there is no practical reason for ancient builders to carve passages too small for a human to enter, with inclinations calculated according to astronomical cycles. That is not the design of a tomb maker. It is the design of someone constructing a conduit, something meant for orientation, transmission, or communication with a space beyond Earth. Whether they understood that purpose or were simply following instructions. Beside these shafts are empty rooms, no offerings, no statues, no inscriptions, only stone, unadorned walls, and an emptiness that feels intentional, almost engineered. Some of these rooms sit high above ground, locked by massive blocks, with no signs of ever being opened. It is as if they were not made for humans to enter, but to contain a kind of resonance or data, or perhaps nothing at all, nothing so absolute that even time cannot echo within it. There are even smaller passages, just wide enough for 21st century robots to crawl through. And those robots have uncovered sealed chambers untouched by any human, rooms hidden behind walls with no cut marks, no doors. They were named mystery chambers, not because of religious awe, but because they serve absolutely no identifiable function within a funerary design. They are empty spaces that feel intentionally inaccessible, as if guarding something never meant for later generations. So a new hypothesis emerged. What if these shafts and sealed rooms form a single system? A network of orientation, resonance, or signal transmission, not in words, not in images, but in frequency. If so, then the pyramids are no longer eternal tombs. They are devices, each stone, each angle, each narrow channel serving a purpose. And when not in use, the entire structure rests like a dormant mechanism, waiting for the right moment, the right trigger, the right presence it once connected with. But the larger question remains unmoving. Why would the ancients spend decades constructing interior structures never meant for human use? Did they not understand what they were building? Or did they understand perfectly, yet simply were not the authors of the design? Perhaps they were only following a blueprint handed to them by another intelligence, one that once stood here, then departed, leaving behind shafts that carry no wind and chambers meant for no one. If you stand in Giza long enough for the sunlight to shift across the stones, you begin to realize this place is not as isolated as it seems. The lines that appear to point inward also reach outward, beyond the desert, beyond the Nile, beyond the continent itself. Because, at the same time, across lands thousands of miles away, there are other structures with a similar shape, similar angles, similar orientations, and something even stranger, a sense of familiarity among monuments that never saw one another. In Mexico, on the high plains of Teotihuacan, An ancient complex stretches beneath the dry mountains. The Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, and the Avenue of the Dead arranged along a deliberate axis. Their sloping sides echo Giza, and in the spatial relationship between the three main structures, once again, the pattern of Orion appears. The constellation the Maya and Aztec also revered as a sacred origin point. Far to the east, in the old lands of China, hundreds of earthen pyramids lie forgotten among the forests of the Qinling Mountains. Some point precisely toward true north. Others form chains resembling the Giza layout. They are rarely mentioned. No tourists, no reconstructed rituals. Only the silence of thousands of years resting beneath trees. Yet the geometric pattern they preserve remains unmistakable to modern eyes. South along the Nile, hundreds of smaller pyramids scatter across Nubia and Sudan, less massive, yet still holding the same proportions, the same orientation, the same angle of slope. It is as though a geometric language spread quietly between civilizations, not through sea trade, not through merchants, but through a form of memory older than spoken words. We cannot call it coincidence. The number of structures, their distances apart, and the consistency of their alignments defy randomness. And we cannot simply claim that every civilization wanted to point to the sky, because not all chose the pyramid shape. And not all reproduced the three-star pattern of Orion's belt with such accuracy. A hypothesis begins to take shape. Instead of each place creating its own design independently, perhaps all were following a shared source of instruction. Not a global civilization, but a blueprint planted at specific points, points with unusual geomagnetic properties, intersections of energy lines, waves, and the star field above. A kind of grid, not a network of trade or religion, but a network of resonance, linked through geometry, vibration, and astronomical alignment. If so, then Giza is not the center. It is merely one node among many. Each pyramid is a point in a chain we have not yet fully deciphered. And if these nodes once resonated together, what would happen? Was there a moment in the distant past when all were activated at once, producing a signal sent from Earth, spiraling with the motion of the planet, rising beyond the atmosphere, traveling farther than the people of that age could possibly imagine? The answer lies not in one place, but in repetition. Structures separated by oceans yet looking toward the same sky, recreating the same cosmic model, choosing the same silence, as though waiting for something to return. A signal, a cycle, or perhaps a final meeting, set in motion long ago by a hand no longer remembered in history, but still traced in the unmoving stones scattered across the world. There is something that always drew the ancients to look up at night, not out of fear of the darkness, but because in that darkness they felt as though something was looking back at them. Among the countless quiet points of light, 3 stars always appeared like a sign impossible to ignore. 3 tilted lights, evenly spaced, standing out within the belt of Orion, a constellation that nearly every ancient civilization somehow recognized, despite never meeting one another. The Egyptians did not call it Orion, they called it Sa. And in their mythology, it was the body of Osiris, the god of death and rebirth. But beneath the symbol lay something deeper, the sense that those 3 stars carried an order beyond mythology. And at Giza, the 3 great pyramids were built in a similar tilted arrangement. 2 large ones close together, the smaller one offset to the left, matching almost perfectly the belt stars of Orion. Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. This led to a striking hypothesis. What if the pyramids were the earthbound model of a celestial map? If so, then the ancients were not simply stacking stones for worship. They were trying to fix an image from the sky, imprinting it onto the ground. And if Orion served as their central reference point, then it was not merely a religious symbol, but a coordinate, a point of origin. From many angles, Orion is an easy constellation to recognize. But in the ancient world, it appeared clearly over Egypt for only a few weeks each year. During that moment, the Nile rose, the farming cycle began, and sacred rituals opened. Orion, in some strange way, synchronized itself with life, almost as though it did not appear, because people needed it, but because it chose to appear when its presence mattered most. But Orion does not appear only in the night sky. It appears in the alignment of the pyramid's corridors. It appears in carvings, diagrams, shafts of stone, and even in the empty chambers no one ever entered. Orion feels like a lock, repeating itself again and again, like a reminder. Perhaps this was not mere obsession from a farming culture looking to the sky for rain. Perhaps it was memory, a point of return. Some researchers have pushed further. They suggest that Orion was not only a pattern copied on Earth, but the origin, a place, not on this planet, that may have once been considered the homeland of the beings who came here in prehistoric times. In that interpretation, Orion is no longer the image of a god, but a coordinate that evokes where they came from, where they returned to, and where they would go once their work here was completed. There is no artifact that can prove this. But when Giza is placed on a celestial reconstruction, allowing the stars to shift back to the positions they held more than 10,000 years ago, the alignment becomes difficult to dismiss. At precisely that distant moment, the three stars of Orion's belt lined up perfectly with the southern axis of the three pyramids, as though the monument was built not just to stand on Earth, but to mark a moment that once happened, or will happen again. If that is true, then Giza is not merely a memorial, it is an anchor in space and time, a location marker, a coordinate on a cosmic map, drawn by minds who understood the movement of the heavens better than anyone we know. And the three stars of Orion, from thousands of years ago to this very night, still hang above the desert like three eyes that have never closed. If there is anything more astonishing than the existence of the three pyramids themselves, it is the fact that they were built in an era when, according to every piece of historical data we currently have, humanity should not have possessed the knowledge to do so. There is no evidence of architectural schools, no preserved blueprints, no long chain of trial and error experiments that normally mark the progression of engineering. Everything simply appears, as though a door opened out of the void, and behind it was a complete body of knowledge, ready to be used. Before the Old Kingdom, the Egyptians had never built anything massive out of stone. Their homes were made of clay, wood, and woven reeds. Yet within just a few generations, they did not merely begin using stone, they built the largest, most precise, most demanding structures the planet had ever seen. There is no sign of gradual learning, no series of rough drafts. They went from having nothing to constructing a world wonder on their very first attempt. It is as though someone had placed into their hands a set of tools, not physical tools, but a completely new way of perceiving space, They began using abstract ratios, measuring by the sun's shadow, aligning with Earth's axis, calibrating according to the rising and setting points of stars. This is not something a developing culture stumbles into naturally. It is the signature of a leap, one that skips steps, bypasses stages, and jumps several levels in a single moment. Researchers call this phenomenon a civilizational mutation, a state in which knowledge emerges not through a chain of cause and effect, but as if someone suddenly turned on the lights in a room that had been dark for ages. It did not happen only in Egypt. Sumer, the Indus Valley, and the Andes show similar patterns. But at Giza, the mutation is so sharp, so abrupt, that it is impossible to ignore. The builders of the first pyramids did not come from formal schools. Yet they knew about compression forces, mass distribution, acoustic and light reflection angles. They knew which stone belonged in which part of the structure, not only for hardness, but for energy conduction and vibration tolerance. And they left behind no manuals, no notes. As if the knowledge did not require writing, only transmission or activation through some other means. Some modern scholars insist it was collective intelligence, slowly expanding over generations. But that timeline does not exist at Giza. At Giza, they built the Great Pyramid first, and afterward, humanity never replicated anything close to it again. It is as if that moment was an opening, a brief slit between two nights, when humans, in some unknown way, touched something far beyond their ordinary limits. Seen from another angle, perhaps the ancients did not invent it all. Perhaps they were merely the builders, and the blueprint came from elsewhere, a place not included in history, not preserved in myth, but encoded quietly in the geometry of stone, a place that needed no language, because each structure was itself a message, encoded in proportions, angles, and placement, waiting to be read again at the right moment. When researchers remeasure every edge, every angle, every slope of the Great Pyramid, the first thing that emerges is not randomness, but numbers, not scattered figures, but a system, a code, a data set that connects not only to the monument itself, but to something far larger, to the planet and to the motion of the sky surrounding it. The perimeter of Khufu's base, when multiplied by the ratio 1 to 43,200, matches almost exactly the circumference of Earth at the equator. Its height, multiplied by the same ratio, equals the planet's radius, from the core to the surface. Not approximately, but with a precision so exact that modern engineers fall silent. Someone, 4,000 years ago, either knew the size of the Earth long before humans had even formed the concept of a planet, or they were following instructions from a perspective capable of seeing Earth's full shape from afar. And it does not end there. The slope of the triangular faces aligns with the angle of sunlight at the winter solstice, the moment when Earth tilts farthest away from the sun. Inside the structure, the main corridor axis points toward the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star's first appearance after its yearly disappearance. A moment that happens only once a year, marking the beginning of the ancient Egyptian calendar. As though the monument was not just an object, but a timing device, tracking cycles, counting years, measuring the repetition of a movement far larger than human life. Some modern astronomers even note that the precessional cycle, the slow wobble of Earth's axis, lasting more than 25,000 years, is reflected in the spacing between the pyramids when modeled in three-dimensional astronomical coordinates. Could an ancient civilization have discovered such a phenomenon? Or were they copying a template, a pattern handed down by an intelligence that had seen this cycle many times before? With numbers like these, the pyramid begins to appear not as a tomb, but as a data table, a stone map built to cosmic scale, encoding information not only about space, but about time itself. And a quiet question rises: for what purpose? Who would need a stone monument with such precise ratios if it were meant only for worship? If we assume the builders were given a pattern, then this structure becomes a translation of something not linguistic, not symbolic, but mathematical, astronomical, geographical, a data set meant not simply to record, but to connect, as though building a structure in perfect proportion to Earth was a way of synchronizing with the planet itself, and aligning it with the stars was a way of opening a line of communication, not through radio waves, not through light, but through resonance. If someone truly passed these numbers down, they left no writing. They left structure, not through words, but through mass, length, angle, and emptiness. A kind of code that only reveals itself when measured closely enough, viewed widely enough, so that we realize we are reading something that was never written, yet still exists. And perhaps what they expected was not immediate understanding, but that someday, when technology, patience, and the willingness to trust the smallest details finally converge, humanity would discover that some numbers were never meant to be found. They were placed in the stone long ago, simply waiting to be read again. Among the countless theories ever placed on the research table about the pyramids, there is one path quieter than the rest, not belonging fully to traditional archaeology, yet not entirely to myth. It is the hypothesis that views the pyramid not as a static monument, but as a dynamic system, a resonant energy device designed to interact with Earth's own magnetic field. An electromagnetic amplifier, not emitting light, not sending signals through wires, but functioning through geometry, mass, and frequency resonance. Beneath Giza, the stone layers are not uniform. The foundation and lower tiers of the pyramid are primarily limestone, a material with natural insulating properties, forming a stable base. But higher up, thick, heavy granite blocks rich in quartz were arranged in a deliberate sequence, centered around the main chambers. Granite, under compression, can produce piezoelectric effects, meaning it generates electricity when pressed or vibrated. And in a structure of this size, the effect is no longer small. It could form the basis of a resonant wave system. A recent study from ITMO University in Russia, combining physical modeling with resonance spectrum analysis, found that the Great Pyramid can concentrate electromagnetic waves inside its chambers if the incoming waves are of the right frequency, specifically within the radio wave range. Something the human eye cannot see, yet the very heartbeat of modern communication. In simulations, electromagnetic waves were drawn into the central rooms, then reflected, refracted, and focused, as though guided by intent. This leads to a possibility. If activated by a wave of the right frequency, whether from the earth or from the sky, the pyramid could function as an amplifier, not to transmit messages from ancient Egyptians, but to receive, process, or resonate with a signal coming from elsewhere. Not a radio tower, but a tuning instrument, where precise vibrations could trigger physical responses within the materials of the structure. The ancients never called it a device, yet they built every block as though they understood the interplay between material, gravity, and sound. Within the pyramid, there are peculiar acoustic points, places where echoes vanish, where sound waves resonate at exact intervals. These nodes are not random. They occur exactly where corridors intersect with the central chambers, as if designed to produce certain notes in an invisible symphony. Seen from above, the entire pyramid resembles a giant resonant tower, broad at the base, narrow at the peak, with a hollowed directional core. And if Earth is a massive electromagnetic field, then the pyramid becomes a component plugged into it, drawing natural energy and reflecting it in ways only those who understood sacred geometry would dare attempt. Not to illuminate, but to synchronize, to touch the vibration of the planet, or to answer a signal from beyond it. If this interpretation is true, then the Great Pyramid is not a ruin. It is a system that has gone dormant, a structure once synchronized with a particular type of wave, now silent only because the source of that wave has vanished. But like any intricate instrument ever built, it does not decay. It simply waits for the right frequency to awaken it once more. When we look closely at each stone, each cut, each nearly non-existent margin of error across a structure stretching hundreds of meters, it becomes difficult to believe that ancient people, working with copper tools and manual labor, could have achieved all of this alone. Yet the more we observe, the more we fail to find any trace of modern technology. No lasers, no heavy machinery, no mechanization, only stone and human hands, and a level of precision that renders both of those explanations insufficient. Between the two ends of that paradox, another possibility slowly emerges. Not that humans invented everything themselves, nor that some other force built it directly, but that it was a collaboration. Humanity provided the hands, while the instruction came from elsewhere. A place no longer spoken by name, yet still present in the geometry, in the light alignments, in the extraordinary patience of those who did not know why they were building, but somehow still built with centimeter-perfect accuracy. Certain ancient Egyptian legends speak of the teachers, who came during a time of chaos, not as gods holding scepters, but as quiet guides, arriving with knowledge and departing without fanfare. They did not demand worship. They did not carve statues of themselves. But their imprint remained in the sudden ability of the people to observe the sky, raise solar columns, identify star positions, and construct structures that aligned with astronomical systems humanity would not measure precisely until thousands of years later. If such beings truly came, they would not have needed to appear in great numbers. No need for force. Only a blueprint, a sequence of instructions, a purpose. An ancient people, living closer to the pulse of nature than we do today, might have sensed this guidance, not through words, but through intuition. They did not need full understanding. They only needed to follow, like someone hearing a distant tone for the first time, yet knowing instinctively how to reach it. Perhaps that is why many elements of the pyramids bear both the raw imprint of human effort, slightly uneven cuts, subtly rough surfaces, and at the same time contain ratios so precise they surpass any practical need. Empty rooms, corridors leading nowhere, light shafts that work only in a single fleeting moment of the year. It is as though humans completed a blueprint they understood only in fragments. The rest left behind for those patient enough to observe much later, like a scribe copying a musical score he cannot play, like a carver engraving a doorway without possessing the key. Perhaps the Egyptians built these structures not because they needed them, but because someone else did. And with a kind of pure trust in something descending from above, they poured their strength into fulfilling a design that was not entirely their own. If that is true, there is no insult to human intelligence. For the true wonder does not lie in who conceived the idea. It lies in the fact that they accomplished it, with bare hands, with real stone, in the desert, driven by a conviction no language can fully describe, that the structure must be completed, not to live in, not to bury the dead, but to wait. When we stand before a single stone weighing tens of tons, lifted dozens of meters into the air and fitted perfectly against the block surrounding it, the question is no longer why, but how. For centuries, theories have risen and fallen like sand carried by the wind. Earthen ramps, levers, wet sand sleds, ropes pulled by hundreds of men. These familiar textbook images may sound reasonable in theory, yet still fail to answer the simplest truth. If it could be done by human hands alone, why can we not replicate it today? Some researchers suggest the Egyptians built enormous ramps of packed earth to haul the stones upward. Yet no trace of such ramps has ever been found. Ramps that would have needed to be larger than the pyramid itself, requiring additional decades to construct. Others propose pulleys and levers. But with soft wood, braided plant fibers, and copper tools, such equipment would not have survived the prolonged strain required to lift granite blocks weighing up to 15 tons. Even the act of lowering a block into place, without cracking it or shifting it off angle, would require a level of control far beyond manual capability. Modern hypotheses have begun to reach further. Some argue that if the pyramid was a sophisticated technical structure, the movement of stones might not have relied purely on mechanical force. A handful of experimental physicists have explored low-frequency vibrations, frequencies which, when tuned correctly, can momentarily reduce the effective weight of an object. Sound, resonance, and piezoelectric effects, three elements already present in pyramid architecture, might combine to create something classical physics does not yet formally recognize: temporary weight reduction. This does not imply anti-gravity in a science fiction sense. Rather, it hints at altering a material's behavior by tapping into the natural energy waves the Earth itself emits. Some researchers suggest the Egyptians may have known how to make stone vibrate at the right frequency, making it easier to move, no longer carrying the full burden of its weight for that brief moment. A technique that may have vanished with the people who once practiced it. And now all that remains is the evidence, the stones themselves, sitting silently as the final proof of something we cannot recreate. Ancient legends speak of sound that made stones rise. In Peru, local stories recall ancestors who could shift massive fortress walls without wheels. In parts of Asia, there are old records of stone instruments producing tones capable of rippling the water's surface. None of these accounts can be fully verified, yet they echo like distant memories of a knowledge that dissolved into the sands of time. A world where materials were not merely lifted, but persuaded to move. If such a technology ever existed, a technology that left no ropes, No wheels, no machinery, only perfect precision and absolute silence, then perhaps it was not technology as we define it, not the result of a linear evolution of tools, but something from a different stream of understanding altogether, appearing briefly, functioning fully, then receding like a tide. And in that light, the three pyramids are no longer mysteries at the end of a path, but footprints left behind on the path of something that once happened. From above, the three pyramids appear like three notes struck in a piece of music written in desert sand. They do not stand in a line. They do not form a perfect triangle. Khafre and Khufu are large and close together, while the smaller Menkaure sits distinctly off to one side, as though intentionally breaking symmetry to achieve a deeper balance. And that is the moment that makes us pause. Why not build just one? Why must there be three? In architectural logic, a single pyramid would be enough. But at Giza, no one chose singularity. They raised three stone peaks, 3 points placed at fixed positions, spaced deliberately, angled with intention. When their centers are connected, the result is an offset triangle, not perfect in textbook geometry, yet perfectly aligned with the belt of Orion above. 3 stars, 3 peaks, 3 lines of sight, as if the sky and the earth were mirroring each other through a cosmic lens that only the ancients were quiet enough to perceive. Some theories call this arrangement an energy triangle, a formation not meant to be admired, but to resonate. When 3 points are placed at the correct distances, correct orientations, and on a geological plate like the limestone bedrock of Giza, they may create a natural resonant field, a zone where Earth's magnetic flow, seismic waves, and surface energy converge, amplify, and disperse. Like 3 anchors for an invisible field, undetectable by ordinary instruments, yet powerful enough to influence the way water moves, the way wind shifts, or even the way waves travel beneath the ground. But 3 is not merely an engineering number. It is the foundational structure of every stable system. 1 point defines nothing. 2 points only create a line. But 3 points define a plane, a direction, a coordinate. 3 is the minimum number required to create a map. And if the pyramids are a system of alignment or orientation, then 3 is essential. Not for seeing, but for guiding. Not for worship, but for opening a gate. Between the pyramids are spaces, areas intentionally left untouched, unshaped, as though reserved for something that cannot be seen with the eye. Perhaps a frequency, perhaps a vibration, perhaps the path of a celestial signal sliding across the land during a fleeting moment of perfect cosmic alignment. In that instant, the 3 stone peaks would no longer stand silent. They would act as an amplifier, receiving, channeling, and sending back a response into the sky. Some scholars believe Menkaure, the smaller pyramid, was intentionally offset, a precise correction meant to replicate the slight misalignment of the star Mintaka in Orion's belt. This has no religious value. It is technical. It reflects the care of someone who knew that if the 3rd point was even slightly misplaced, the entire system would fall out of tune. As though they built not for grandeur, but for a single, exact deviation, the only one which allowed connection with something not found on Earth. Viewed from that angle, Giza is not a burial site. It is a directional device, a coded doorway carved in stone, Each peak is a data point. Each gap between them is a channel for waves. And only when all 3 points synchronize at a particular moment in the long turning of the galaxy does the entire structure return to an active state. Perhaps it already happened once, or perhaps it is waiting to happen again. On the faded stone walls deep inside Egypt's ancient temples, among countless carvings of harvests, gods, and rituals, appear images that do not belong to everyday life. Not birds, not boats, not suns or human forms, but shapes that are round, elongated, haloed in light, sometimes shown descending, sometimes hovering between columns of brightness stretching across the sky. The Egyptians did not write in stories, they wrote in symbols. And when those symbols begin depicting something that does not exist in the world, one question inevitably rises. What did they once see? In the Thule Papyrus, a controversial document transcribed by an Italian archaeologist in the early 20th century, there is a passage describing a fiery flying disk that appeared in the sky during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III. The account describes a round object emitting a sharp, high sound, moving at great speed, frightening soldiers. It did not appear alone. Many such objects arrived, flying in formation, then vanished toward the rising sun. Whether the document is authentic remains debated, but the description does not stand alone in ancient writings. All the papyri and temple carvings mention bolts of light, objects with no wheels, no legs, moving through the sky like falling stars that never fade. In the myth of Ra, the sun god travels across the heavens each day in a vessel called the Manjet, carrying light across the world. But when viewed through eyes unbound by symbolism, the vessel does not seem to move across the Nile, but across the sky, needing no oars, no wind, only light. The question is not whether the stories are mythic, but how detailed they are. The Egyptians carved flying objects with glowing tails, streaks of light crossing the sky, trails of smoke without fire, not once, but repeatedly, etched in stone, painted in tombs, written into ritual texts. If this were all imagination, why would the imagery remain so consistent across centuries? Even in texts outside the Egyptian canon, like the ancient Book of Enoch or later Gnostic writings, there are references to watchers descending from the heavens, arriving in vessels of light that they did not step out of, but dissolved into. These passages are not unique to Egypt. They echo across Sumer, India, Mesoamerica, as if humanity shares a memory not tied to a single culture, but to an encounter that left an imprint deeper than history. If the pyramids are understood as receivers of waves, light, and orientation, then they might also be seen as landing points, not in the physical sense, but in the frequency sense. A place where vessels of light, if such things existed, could synchronize, identify, and come to rest during a particular cosmic cycle, like a map of light, where only at the moment the sky aligns with the stone does a point of contact open. Perhaps such moments are rare. Perhaps they happened long ago. But if there was ever a time when the sky opened and the light above was not merely sunlight, but something that moved, descended, paused, and left behind a silence deeper than night, then the 3 pyramids would no longer be silent shapes in the sand. They would be 3 receiving points, 3 places where light once touched down, then withdrew, leaving behind a memory carved into stone, encoded in symbols, and repeated deliberately in legends no one dares call truth. Yet no one has ever fully forgotten. Long before hymns were written in the language of abstraction, the Egyptians carved their gods in forms that were startlingly literal. Human faces, human bodies, yet sometimes crowned with the head of a falcon, a jackal, or wings that stretched as wide as the horizon. They did not hide this. They did not explain it. They simply carved it into stone, as if to say, these are the ones who came from above. Osiris, the guardian of life after death, is often shown wrapped in linen, skin-tinted green, crowned with the towering Atef headdress, holding the staff of authority. In the ancient texts, he does not come from any land known to humankind. He comes from a first place, where light existed before the Nile ever flowed. They say he did not grow up as mortals do. He appeared fully formed, carrying the knowledge that shaped the order of the universe. Thoth, the god of knowledge and technology, often shown with the head of the ibis, is the keeper of time, the measurer of stars, the writer of names for worlds that did not yet have names. In a handful of rare carvings, Thoth does not walk at all. He floats between columns of light, his eyes without pupils, as though he could see through the surface of matter itself. While other gods demanded worship, Thoth required only remembrance, as if knowledge itself were the purest form of devotion. Ra, the sun god, is even more enigmatic. He is called the firstborn of light, traveling each day across the sky in a flying boat, not to preach, but to sustain life by his presence alone. But there is one detail often overlooked. In many carvings, Ra's boat has no sail, no oars, no need for wind. It glows, leaves a streak behind it, and sometimes lowers itself toward the ground before vanishing. Some legends say that when Ra grew angry, the vessel emitted a sound no one could endure, causing the desert to tremble without a single gust of wind. If one looks at these beings not as myths, but as entities described in ancient language, the details begin to take new shape. Instead of magic, one sees technology. Instead of supernatural power, one sees mastery of processes beyond the understanding of early humankind. A being arriving from another star system, one who knew light, resonance, waves, and structure, would easily be perceived as a god, not because they wanted worship, but because the people of that era had no other words to describe such presence. At the temple of Edfu, inscriptions speak of a first time, when those from the light arrived, restored order, built sacred centers, and shared knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, sound, and renewal. Some passages use the phrase, "those who are like us, but not like us." They looked human, but their voices did not require mouths. Their presence cast no shadow. And sometimes they would leave and return without using any visible path. If Osiris was the one placed down from the sky, and Thoth was the keeper of the frequencies of the stars, and Ra was the bearer of life energy from a distant place, then they were three beings, three forms of intelligence, and none of them originated from the earth beneath our feet. They became symbols. But if those symbols were meant to reflect real intelligences that once came here, then the carvings stop being mythology. They become memory of being shaped like humans, stepping out of light, leaving behind blueprints, then dissolving into the unseen, as if they never touched the ground at all. But the pyramids remain, still standing, as the framework for something that once passed through. And in the human-like forms of the gods, perhaps what the ancients wish to tell us is not a story of religion, but a reminder that sometimes what looks most like us may not belong to humankind at all. If there truly was a moment of contact, a point in the distant past when humanity was awakened from its cycle of survival by an intelligence from elsewhere, then perhaps the first action was not teaching, but building. Not building to live in, not to claim territory, but to mark a point. A single location on Earth where light and stone, sound and sky, geometry and magnetism could resonate into a signal, not a message to be sent out, but one meant to be found again. From that perspective, Giza is no longer a wonder. It becomes a station, a relay point, a temporary stop, not for humans, but for those who began the conversation. Like an ancient antenna that requires no electricity, a wireless outpost with no waves, no blinking lights, yet still functional, through proportion, resonance, and position. In modern astronomy, locating Earth in space often begins by referencing pulsars, stars that pulse in perfect rhythm like cosmic clocks. But without modern technology, how would you re-establish a location in three-dimensional space among billions of stars? You would need a landmark, some form of geometric address, recognizable from great distances. Something unchanging, something carrying absolute permanence, and the pyramids are exactly that kind of sign. A structure resistant to erosion, difficult to destroy, impossible to confuse with anything else. A precise, balanced pyramid aligned to axes, directions, and coordinates, standing as a fixed marker beneath a drifting sky. A construct capable of surviving long enough that, if they ever returned, they could still locate the original point of contact. A kind of anchor. In nautical language, an anchor prevents a vessel from drifting. In celestial language, a signal anchor is the first point you need to re-establish communication. If Giza was such a point, it would not need to transmit constantly. It would only need to remain still, to wait for the right moment, the right alignment, the right resonance cycle. When the factors converge, it becomes active again, as a receiver or a transmitter. Some researchers have even proposed that the three pyramids represent more than Orion's belt, that they encode a three-dimensional coordinate system within their ratios, reflecting Earth's position within the Milky Way at a specific moment in time. Not for anyone on Earth to read, but for someone beyond it to recognize. A kind of refined signature, not within a single plane, but woven into the intersection of astronomy, physics, and geometry. If so, then the first visitors may have left this relay point not to monitor us, but to remember us. A silent station that remains dormant until the right alignment turns it into a window, a place of reconnection, not for humans to step through, but for an external gaze to lock onto a familiar point on a continuously turning planet. And if that intention still lingers, if the dialogue was never truly closed, then the three pyramids will remain exactly where they are, waiting for the next cycle, requiring no additional words, no additional hands, only the stars returning to their ancient positions. Only the right moment. Only the possibility that someone out there may once again wish to hear the first echo they themselves sent into this world. Not everyone can see what happens inside a block of stone. Sometimes the silence of matter hides movements more intricate than any machine humanity has ever built. And within the pyramid, where light cannot reach, modern simulations have revealed something unexpected. Stone, when arranged in the right proportions, at the right distances, with the right materials, may not remain passive. It becomes a resonant structure. Recent physical models, using high-frequency simulation technology, tested the Great Pyramid's ability to concentrate electromagnetic waves. The results startled many researchers. When exposed to the proper frequency, the structure begins to focus energy at specific points inside, particularly in the king's chamber and the subterranean rooms below, as if the stone were working, not through motion, but through the precise reflection of invisible waves. The pyramid shape acts like a frequency guide, a transmitter that needs no antenna, no wires. When waves arrive from outside or are generated within, the shape and material cause them to bounce, amplify, and align into a resonant axis. Depending on the wavelength, energy may be retained, concentrated, or redirected outward along a fixed path, as though the stone structure is responding through its geometry, much like a musical instrument that vibrates when hearing the right note, even without being touched. The pyramid may have been designed to react to a specific type of wave. Not only sound, but perhaps electromagnetic waves, seismic waves, or even a type of vibration not yet classified by modern physics. This suggests the pyramid does not broadcast like a radio transmitter. It waits. It is not active, but it is ready. Among the granite blocks, rich in quartz, some theories propose that pressure and ambient temperature could generate small electrical potentials, enough to alter the electromagnetic environment within the chambers. And if one places this within the context of a synchronized cosmic signal, say, a narrow beam from a stellar source, the entire structure could behave as a directional resonator, a device that produces no light, no heat, yet still reflects waves back toward their origin, like a whisper traveling against the flow of space. In more daring theories, physicists ask, if the pyramid is a resonant device, what is it resonating with? Earth's magnetic field? The background hum of the universe? Or a signal intentionally designed to arrive here and reflect back only when the structure was fully completed? Just as a perfect reflection appears only when the water is still, this stone monument may only react when its geometry is flawless, and that may be why its proportions matter so intensely. Why every angle, every slope, every empty chamber, every shaft must align, not for aesthetics, but because only in geometric precision can waves be amplified correctly. And only through correct amplification can a signal return to the place it first departed. If that is true, then Giza is not a symbol, it is a reflection, an echo carved in stone, a device waiting, not to invent, but to be activated, not to measure, but to answer. And the question it waits to answer may have been sent long before humans learned to write. From the eastern side of the pyramid complex, when the first light touches the sand, a single figure remains quietly facing the sunrise. It does not turn toward the pyramids. It does not face humanity. It looks outward, toward a place with no city, no monument, no prayer echoing back. It is the Sphinx, Not as tall as the pyramids, not as vast as the plateau, but holding a stillness of a different kind. Not the stillness of stone, but of purpose. And among all the ancient structures at Giza, only one carries the form of a half-human, half-beast, as if it were itself the intersection of intellect and instinct, of man and something that has yet to be named. Its expression is not a smile, not a judgment, but a gaze that never changes, as though it is observing, as though it is waiting. Scholars still debate. What does it represent? A king? A god? A memory turned to stone? Or a guardian? If the three pyramids are the technical components of a system, then the Sphinx may be its symbolic part. Not to operate it, but to stand watch. Much like modern space outposts that have personnel monitoring signals, even if they do not generate them. The Sphinx stands in an observation position between sky and desert, as though it serves as a witness for every incoming and outgoing signal. It does not create, but it does not look away. In mythology, hybrid creatures like the Sphinx always mark thresholds, the boundary between the human world and the other world. They do not teach, they define, not through words, but through presence. And the strange thing is, though thousands of years of history are carved across the Nile Valley, the Sphinx carries no clear inscription explaining its name, its age, or its origin, as though it too refuses to be understood by ordinary language. Some scholars have proposed that the Sphinx is older than the pyramids themselves, that it may have been the first element carved into the original bedrock long before the limestone blocks were hauled to Giza. If that is true, then it was not built to fulfill a royal agenda. It was the earliest mark, a symbol pressed into the ground to declare, this place will be a beginning or an ending. And with eyes fixed toward the east, where the sun never fails its return, the Sphinx may not simply be watching the dawn. It may be aligning with a larger cycle, one in which Giza is not merely a location, but a point in a stellar map, an anchor for a signal, a place where someone or something once promised to return. In that profound silence, the Sphinx answers none of our questions. It simply remains, a guardian, unarmed, unexpressive, and yet, standing before it, one cannot help but ask, what am I stepping into, and who is watching from the other side? We have long grown accustomed to seeing the three pyramids as static structures. But what happens if we set aside the idea of linear time and begin to view them as a mechanism? A structure that does not operate through machinery, but through the movement of the sky itself. A design that needs no switch, only the right moment. And if everything aligns, position, angle, frequency, material, and the necessary stillness, there may come a single instant when the three pyramids synchronize. It is no coincidence that the three pyramids, large and small, were built along a single axis, a line pointing straight toward the constellation Orion, specifically its three belt stars. But the remarkable aspect is not merely the projection of Orion onto Earth. It is the recurrence. After a certain cosmic cycle, when the planets return to their original positions, when starlight from ancient suns aligns once again with the pyramid's orientation, when Earth tilts at just the right angle, a resonant doorway may open. In many ancient astronomical systems, the convergence of major cycles, precession, the ecliptic, and solar cycles, was considered the most sacred moment. not just because of climate or agriculture, but because it was when sky energy and earth energy met. The pyramids functioning as amplifiers would need only that moment to awaken their deepest purpose. And not one pyramid, but all three, like three strings vibrating at the same frequency, or three mirrors directing light into a single point. When the three pyramids simultaneously receive and reflect energy, whether from natural electromagnetic fields, the sun's magnetism, or the ancient starlight of Orion, the entire Giza Plateau ceases to be ground. It becomes a conduit, a connection not between structures, but between dimensions. Some ancient physicists hinted that when certain cosmic conditions align, the space between physical objects can become a resonant window. Not a window for seeing, a window for signals to pass without distortion. And if Giza truly is a signal anchor, as earlier theories suggest, then that moment of synchronization would activate the system. Once, like the final outgoing ripple from Earth, or the incoming reply from elsewhere. The ancients, without telescopes or frequency meters, still understood the alignment of stars, poles, and hidden planets. They built their monuments not simply to endure, but to wait, as if they had been told. There will come a time when the light falls at the right angle, when shadow meets axis, when the air grows still, and what happens next will no longer be in your hands. And if that moment ever came, if just once the three pyramids synchronized, not with noise, but with vibration, not with fire, but with waves, then perhaps Earth once spoke, not through language, but through form, a sound no ear could hear, a map no eye could read, yet clear enough for someone to recognize and remember, so that one day, when the cycle returns, so might they. Across the layered clouds of time, there are moments not recorded in words, but in the sudden change in the eyes of those who kept watch through the night. Moments when they looked up at the sky not to measure constellations, but to listen for something language had not yet learned to name. Perhaps on a night like that, the ancient world ceased to be an age of myth and became an age of encounter. Not every signal announces itself through sound. Some vibrations can only be felt, like the faint shiver of a lake when a distant wind passes over it. Ancient Egyptian records speak of strange moments. A light descending without the sun, a wind from above carrying a voice without a mouth, or wall carvings showing beings from the sky stepping down in a boat that burned no fire. These are not depictions of worship. They are depictions of presence. If the signal from the three pyramids was ever activated, like a knock sent into the silence of the cosmos, then the most significant part is not how it was sent. It is that it was received and answered, perhaps only through a returning wave, a beam of light bending in ways no refraction law predicts, a strange vibration in the air, a stillness so absolute that the entire Giza Plateau seemed to hold its breath. Ancient legends do not describe such responses in scientific terms, yet they preserved them in metaphor. The visitors from the sky spoke without mouths, used no hands, yet caused the earth itself to tremble. It may be exaggeration, or it may be the only way a symbolic language could describe an invisible vibration, a technology so unfamiliar that human imagery could not contain it. Some archaeologists have noted inscriptions on the Abydos stone panels depicting beings of human shape who stepped out of light without casting a shadow. Curiously, these images appear only in a handful of temples, all from the same narrow time window, as if they were recording an event, not mythology, but testimony. A historical marker no one is certain occurred, or perhaps has been deliberately obscured. In the original texts, a phrase appears repeatedly: the moment when the eye of the sky opened. A poetic way of naming an exact astronomical instant, when everything aligned. And immediately after that point, the inscriptions changed. New symbols appeared. Characters unseen in the Egyptian semantic system. Perhaps they were not meant for local readers at all. Perhaps they were sent outward, or were meant as a reply. When two sides cannot speak the same language, they draw. They repeat forms. They use symbols only one side understands, but enough to say, "We heard you," and if that is true, then the moment of contact in the ancient world is no longer a mythic scene. It becomes a junction in a chain of interactions never formally recorded, not in books, but in the sudden shift in how the ancients described the universe. Before that night, they looked up to measure the stars. Afterward, they began describing those who came from the stars. We often imagine that if there had ever been a meeting between human beings and those who came from elsewhere, it would have been recorded in words. Yet the ancient civilizations left no such record, no dialogues, no clear descriptions. What they left instead were images no one can fully decipher, rituals enacted long after their meaning was forgotten, structures built with such impossible precision that modern instruments are required just to confirm it was not an accident. In the old funerary texts, the Book of Going Forth by Night, the Book of Gates, and the inscriptions that line the tomb walls, strange symbols appear again and again. A man with the head of a bird holding a staff that never touches the ground. Solar boats drifting across the night sky. A circle drawn repeatedly, but never closed. Modern scholars call these mythologies. But what if they were not stories at all, but the only way the ancients knew how to record something too vast to speak of directly? Inside the temple of Abydos, there are carvings concealed beneath later layers of stone, revealed only when the outer walls eroded or were removed. Some of them depict forms that do not belong to the Egyptian symbolic system. Spirals, interlocking rings, mirrored shapes, as if trying to express movement, energy, connection beyond the grasp of physical imagery. And in the midst of them, one motif always returns: light. Not sunlight, but light from the void. Ancient Egyptian rituals, especially the opening of the mouth ceremony for the dead, reenact a journey through gates, encounters with luminous beings, and entry into the life beyond. But what if this ritual was not merely for the soul, but a reenactment, a rehearsal of an encounter that once took place? If someone had truly crossed through those gates, entered a realm of radiant presence, and lived to return, then the only way to preserve that memory was to turn it into ritual, a sacred performance of something that could not be told. Even in the architecture of the pyramids, there are metaphors too precise to dismiss. Ventilation shafts that do not ventilate, but point directly toward Orion and the northern pole star, not to carry air, but to aim. Chambers offset from the central axis, as though avoiding something or protecting something from sight. Blocks placed at the precise intersections of invisible lines, unreachable yet necessary, as if meant to keep some current from breaking. Small details, but all pointing toward the same suggestion. Something significant happened here, and it was encoded, not narrated. Through the centuries, those codes became rituals. People performed sacred acts long after the original purpose faded. They copied symbols they no longer understood, and still they repeated them. Because deep in the ancestral memory of our species, something once occurred, something beyond understanding, and instead of telling it, they carved it into stone, raised it into towers, and moved their bodies through sequences of ancient gestures, so that it would not disappear, so that the encounter, however brief, would not be lost to the desert. There is something peculiar about turning points in human history. They almost never end with a clear sign. Endings do not arrive like doors slamming shut, but like a thin mist slowly dissolving, leaving behind a silence no one knows how to name. And when we look at ancient Egypt, at the stone towers, once believed to touch the heavens, the most remarkable thing may not be when they were built, but when they stopped shining. At the height of that ancient knowledge, with its precise numbers, its flawless astronomical alignments, its corridors shaped like veins carrying energy, everything suddenly halted. The dynasties that followed no longer raised pyramids. They turned instead to tombs carved deep beneath the earth. Architectural knowledge changed. Their observations of the night sky grew simpler. The air shafts, once aimed perfectly at Orion, were never recreated. And so the question remains, why? Perhaps it was the result of upheavals. Years of strange flooding along the Nile, shifts in climate, waves of famine, conflicts rising between rival regions. It seemed that every priority changed, from reaching toward the sky to simply holding the ground beneath their feet. But deeper than that lies a quieter hypothesis woven through the ruins, that the connection had ended. Not because humanity stopped seeking, but because the other side had withdrawn. In many old tales, the Nejeru, the gods, do not die. They retreat into the sky or sink into the eternal waters. There are descriptions of Osiris being taken back into the light, or Ra disappearing into the darkness above the western horizon. The ancient texts do not describe an ending filled with loss, but one shaped by departure, intentional, deliberate, as if the meeting was always meant to be temporary, as if some condition had no longer been met. And if we imagine the three pyramids as receivers activated only in that single moment, when every physical, astronomical, and energetic factor aligned, then their departure was not abandonment at all, but a shutting down of the signal, a quiet ending, one that may have been scheduled long before. Just as a receiver turns off once its task is complete, even if the user never fully understood how it worked. In the 3 centuries following the Giza era, the monumental structures became lower, simpler, no longer aligned with the stars in the ways they once were. Dynasties shifted more rapidly. The rituals endured, but only as shadows of something that had once been far more alive. Symbols became religion. Markings became metaphors. And the most important thing of all, the connection, was slowly replaced by belief. Or perhaps it was they, those visitors, who chose to step away. Perhaps they understood that a civilization only truly grows when it learns to walk on its own. That the gift they had offered had fulfilled its purpose. awakening memory, planting the seed of understanding, giving humanity just enough of a framework to look up at the sky and finally ask the real question. After that, they withdrew, leaving no letters, no explanations, because what they came to teach was never meant to be spoken. And we, moving along the long river of history, have grown accustomed to that emptiness. Giza still stands, but silent, not because it has lost its function, but because that moment has passed. The first movement of the symphony has ended, waiting now for another moment, another alignment, when the music may continue, if the player still remembers where the very first note began. When the last light faded inside those ancient corridors, and the echoes stopped answering from the sky, only stone remained. And humanity, standing before those stones, had to give them a name, to understand, to suit themselves, to avoid seeing the emptiness. They called it a tomb, a resting place for great pharaohs, a site for the soul to ascend. But what if that was only the final disguise of a machine that once lived? No mummy has ever been found in the Great Pyramid, no lavish funerary goods, no inscriptions describing a burial ritual, only empty chambers, sharp-edged corridors of stone, and a level of precision so astonishing that it refuses to fit within the logic of death. Nothing about this architecture breathes funerary purpose. It feels instead like a structure waiting to be reactivated, a starship with an empty cockpit, a transmission station after the signal has gone silent, when knowledge was no longer passed down intact. Later generations could only interpret through feeling. They saw vast rooms and intricate passages, and they thought, this must be for a king. But they did not ask, why does a tomb contain no body? Why does it aim precisely at Orion? Why would a place for rest require air shafts that point towards specific stars, instead of simply lying quiet beneath the earth? Across millennia, meaning gathered around the pyramids like sand around a weathered statue. The structure ceased being a point of connection and became a symbol of power, then a myth, then a historical relic. With every new name, the original purpose sank one layer deeper, until all that remained was the shell. But not everything disappeared. The architecture still holds traces that cannot be erased. The nearly perfect vertical axis, deviating by less than 1,000th of a degree. The location resting upon the proportional center of Earth's landmass. The enormous stone blocks placed without mortar, unmoving after thousands of years. Everything suggests a design not meant for worship, but for functioning. Not an end to a human life, but a beginning to another form of communication. If the pyramid was built, not to remember the past but to connect to the future, then the label of tomb became the perfect camouflage. Because in a world slowly losing its connection to the rhythms of sky and earth, preserving the structure under any name was still a way to protect the link. A signal station no longer transmitting, yet never destroyed. And if someone once built those doors, they must have known there would come a time when they would close. Not forever, only until the conditions aligned again, so that those who came later, even after forgetting almost everything, could still see the original shape and begin to ask once more. Begin to listen again. Begin to decode the symbols frozen in stone until a new sliver of light appears. And the door opens once more. Not by human hands, but by the frequency of a moment predetermined long ago. For centuries, the pyramids were regarded as historical monuments, grand, mysterious, but silent. The first expeditions to Giza dug through the limestone, drew diagrams, calculated angles. They came seeking confirmation of the ancients' brilliance. No one imagined the structure might still be functioning in another sense. But when modern instruments extended their metallic limbs into the 1,000-year-old stone, what they uncovered no longer belongs solely to archaeology. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project used muons, subatomic particles capable of passing through dense matter, to examine the Great Pyramid without disturbing a single block. What they found was astonishing. A massive void, more than 30 meters long, resting directly above the Grand Gallery. A chamber never entered, never described, never accounted for. They called it the Great Void, as though the pyramid had never truly revealed its full interior to human understanding, and that discovery was only the beginning. Subsequent studies of electromagnetic behavior within the pyramid uncovered something stranger still. At specific frequencies, the internal chambers concentrate and amplify energy, not randomly, but in a clear pattern. It was as if the entire monument had been shaped to resonate with a form of power we do not yet know how to measure. The structure is not merely a container of stone. It behaves like a colossal, resonant device. Inside the king's chamber, sensors detected unusually strong electromagnetic fluctuations, despite the absence of any electronic source. The towering granite blocks, rich in quartz, may act as natural crystal resonators. Inevitably, researchers began to ask, was this an engineered system meant to interface with Earth's magnetic field? Even more unsettling, the strongest resonance points align perfectly with chambers arranged along a vertical axis, as though an electromagnetic spine runs from the pyramid's foundation to its apex. No one dares to call this evidence. Yet the deeper we move into the ancient geometry, the more we encounter concepts that do not belong to that age, or perhaps even to ours. Three-dimensional simulations reveal additional anomalies, concealed tunnels beneath layers of stone, blocking slabs that do not match the rest of the architecture, directional grooves that appear to guide something, but toward a destination no one has yet found. The pyramid does not present a single meaning. It behaves like a three-dimensional map, one that reveals itself only to those with the proper instruments and the patience to listen. And what troubles modern scientists most is not the complexity of the engineering, but the sensation that something inside the structure is still waiting, not for worship, not for ceremony, but for understanding. The pyramid was never meant to be merely observed. It was meant to be activated. And perhaps, when the last measurement falls into place and the final void is deciphered, we will discover that we are not looking at a monument at all, but at a signal, still pulsing softly within the stone. By the late 20th century, when humanity first built instruments capable of drinking radio waves from deep space, they were not merely searching for life, they were searching for something familiar, a pattern, a rhythm, a pulse that hinted at intention. And then in recent years, amid the drifting nebulae, fragments of broken signals began to surface, emerging from regions of the sky where no stars burn. Bursts of radio light repeating at almost perfect intervals. Long, then short, then long again. No words, yet a logic unmistakable in its structure. Some of these signals originate from fixed coordinates, steady, unwavering, as if anchored to an invisible beacon. Their frequencies do not match pulsars, black holes, or any cosmic machinery we currently understand. They do not echo the static of satellites or the signatures of reflected debris. And the detail that unsettles researchers most is that several of these directions align with the orientation of the narrow star shafts inside the Great Pyramid, especially those aimed toward Orion, as though the architecture itself had been tuned to await a distant whisper. Is this coincidence? Or recurrence? A cycle calculated long before modern humanity learned to listen? Because in space, a message can travel for thousands of years before reaching our world. If a signal was sent by a distant civilization, perhaps in the age when Giza was new, then the ancients may have received the first transmission. And now, equipped with radio telescopes and digital ears, we may be hearing the continuation of a dialogue we never realized had started. Inside the pyramid's geometry, its shafts, slopes, and alignments are not mere aesthetic choices. They resemble a spatial coordinate grid, an astronomical address encoded in stone. If someone beyond Earth wished to send a letter, they would need a reference point fixed in the cosmic sea. And Giza, with its unwavering orientation to true north, its stellar precision, its alignment with the cycles of Orion, may stand as that address, a point of return, a cosmic signature. Modern observatories like FAST and SETI now record frequency anomalies appearing within Earth's so-called habitable band. The signals are irregular but persistent, as if something distant is calibrating, adjusting, waiting for the exact alignment to transmit again. And if the pyramids were designed as instruments of communication, then perhaps their quiet will break only when energy, magnetism, and celestial geometry fall back into their ancient resonance. We assume that contact requires language, images, sound. But a civilization beyond symbol may communicate through resonance alone, through pulses that the planet itself can feel. In that view, Earth is not only a world, but part of a larger organism, and Giza, the first node of its nervous system, the point where an outside intelligence might touch the planet without ever setting foot on its surface. Amid the billions of signals crossing our atmosphere each day, a few remain unclaimed. Brief interruptions of silence marked by echoes from no known origin. What makes these anomalies remarkable is not their intensity, but their patience. They wait, they repeat, they persist through centuries of human deafness, as if someone is still sending them. Not for a reply, not for acknowledgement, but simply to know whether anyone down here is finally listening. From the stratosphere, where satellites sweep through Earth's orbit, torrents of data pour down every second. Remote sensing no longer merely observes the planet's surface. It pierces forests, dunes, glaciers, and even the soft sediment of time. Above the Giza Plateau, near-infrared imaging has begun to expose thermal signatures that refuse simple explanation. Patches of stone holding heat far longer than physics predicts, or emitting microwave patterns too precise to dismiss as noise. Scientists avoid calling it proof, but they agree on one unsettling point. Giza is not silent. It is not dead. It is only dormant. In quantum laboratories, experiments in nonlinear resonance, long-distance particle entanglement, and information existing in overlapping states whisper of a communication method that needs no wires, no light, no air. It is the kind of transmission ancient cultures once called the breath of the cosmos. A vibration too subtle for senses, but strong enough to move through matter the way memory moves through a dream. What once lived in myth is now described with new vocabulary: zero-point fields, coherence networks, interference webs of intelligence. And when these quantum models are projected onto Earth's ancient monuments, strange intersections emerge. Energetic nodes repeating across continents. Giza, Teotihuacan, Stonehenge, Angkor Wat. They align with magnetic fault lines and subterranean wave currents, as if someone once understood, or once taught, how to embed interactive gateways inside the architecture of the planet itself. Their placements are not random. They form a lattice, a map, a system wired into Earth long before modern instruments could detect it. Now, as technology deepens, the pattern grows clearer. Numbers begin to echo legends. Algorithms begin to validate intuition. It feels less like discovery and more like remembering, as if humanity has been walking a vast spiral and has suddenly reached a point where the new turn aligns perfectly with the first. Not accident, not myth. A cycle returning to itself. Thus the great question of our age softens and reshapes. It is no longer, is extraterrestrial life real? That is too small, too late. A subtler question rises in its place. If contact once occurred, are we drifting toward that moment again? Not because they are coming back in ships of fire or metal, but because we are rising, evolving, inching toward the frequency where the old conversation once took place. If a signal was ever sent to Earth, its creators would understand cycles. They would know humanity would need time, not to build machines, but to grow in perception. They would wait, not for a reply, but for maturity, the capacity not merely to observe, but to comprehend, not only to decode, but to resonate. And when that alignment finally returns, the doorway will not need to swing open. Doors are for boundaries, and this connection never had any. It was only our noise, our urgency, our forgetting that made us think we were alone. The conversation continued, woven through frequencies too quiet for our earlier selves to hear. Now, for the first time in thousands of years, we are becoming still enough, sensitive enough, patient enough to stop calling these echoes myth, and instead recognize them as the next turn of an ancient dialogue, a dialogue that never ended, only waited for us to return to the place where it began. Perhaps we will never know the whole truth, never know who began it, whether a hand once placed the first stone, or whether the idea itself drifted into someone's dream like a whisper from a distant shore. Yet across all the centuries that have passed, through layers of dust, belief, and forgetting, the three pyramids remain, not simply as monuments of stone, but as the final low notes of a song that has never fully faded. They no longer lie quietly on the earth as mere structures or tombs or symbols. They have become something else entirely, a living memory, a field of stillness where anyone who steps inside can sense a presence deeper than history, as if every stone still holds the warmth of a question that never sought an answer, only a listener, for their existence does not ask for belief. It only asks for silence. The pyramids make no declarations and do not insist that we understand them. They simply stand, aligned with Orion, breathing in rhythm with the planet itself, waiting for someone patient enough to feel what cannot be spoken aloud. And within that silence lies not the reminder that we were once visited, but something far more intimate. That humanity has never been alone, not in the universe, and not in its search for meaning. Perhaps those who once guided us did not depart entirely. Perhaps they only stepped beyond the frequency we can measure, leaving behind the pyramids as a pulse, a quiet rhythm to help us remember that we were touched once before. Now, as humans finally move outward, beyond the moon, toward Mars, toward worlds we have only traced on maps, the three pyramids begin to shine in another sense, not through physical light, but through invitation, direction, a reminder that discovery is not found in reaching the end, but in daring to ask who might be waiting beyond the horizon. For if earlier civilizations once stood here, long before us, they must have looked upon these same stars and asked the same question we now breathe into the night. Are we alone? And if they left an invitation, etched in stone, encoded in light, carried in frequency, or held silently in intention, then the pyramids are that hidden map, a message preserved not for the eyes, but for the mind that listens. They do not speak, yet they endure, not to be decoded, but to be felt, as if, when someone stands long enough in the desert, letting every assumption fall away until only presence remains, the meeting will unfold, not through transmitted signals, but through a resonance shared between two forms of awareness, one still traveling and one that has never truly gone. And in that gentle convergence lies the realization that the three pyramids do not conclude with an answer. They conclude with an invitation, or perhaps, in the oldest, softest sense, they were never ending anything at all. They were simply saying hello.